Five, four, three, two, one.
All right, hello, willkommen, bienvenue, konnichiwa, ni hao, jambo, marhaba. It's time for the Armist Inquisition yet again, episode 196. Yes, that's a lot, isn't it? It is. 196 on Sunday the 22nd of August. I'm Amish Phil.
I'm Amish Matt.
And tonight we've got Nigel Howitt here from the Lawful Rebel. How are we doing, Nigel?
Yeah, very good, guys. Glad to be with you tonight.
It's our pleasure. You also do a podcast, Living Outside the Matrix.
Yeah, that's the bi-weekly podcast, and just sort of look at things that are generally, not in the mainstream or that are turned upside down on the mainstream, stuff like that.
Absolutely, yeah. I've got the. You can just if you're on YouTube, you can see the web address there. No wwws, just lawfulrebel.com, and you've got a ton of information on there about all sorts of wild and interesting topics. I mean, why don't you start by giving us a bit of background and sort of how you ended up on this journey and becoming a lawful rebel?
Yeah, gosh. Well, it started really with just trying to live my own life as we all want to, just kind of trying to get on and do what I want, not be messed around with. And trying to live on my own land, and got into a bit of a tangle with the government because I wanted them to prove that I needed their permission to do so, but they wouldn't play ball, really. They wouldn't listen to me. And cut a long story short, it became apparent that we're not as free as we'd like to think we are in this country, on British Isles at least, and that really bothered me. So that wasn't right at the beginning of it. 9/11 kind of got me thinking about things, but yeah, that's when I knew that I was effectively some kind of rebel, because I realized that the government was undoubtedly my adversary in this situation. I hesitate to use the word that begins with E, but in some respect, yeah, they're my adversary. And as soon as that's clear, that sets the whole context for, if you want to live for the values that you value, freedom and the things that you want. As soon as you know who your enemy is, there, I've said it. It helps make it easier, because you know where you stand. You're not like to behave inappropriately. So yeah, that's really kind of what drives it, Phil. That sort of experience.
Yeah, what I've heard from a lot of people in the States who want to start living off the grid is they run into all sorts of difficulties, and things like zoning laws are invoked, and various states will sort of make it as difficult as possible to just, you would think it should be so easy, just buy a plot of land, set yourself up and just keep yourself to yourself. I mean, what was like the state's arguments against you setting up like this?
Well, it's just because you haven't got their permission. It's outside of their control structure. I mean, it is alarming that it isn't as easy as you say it should be. And indeed, in America, the land of homesteading, you went out there, you grabbed a bit of land and you homesteaded. That was it. That was your claim. And people don't realize it's a fundamental litmus test of your freedom, is to be able to do what you like on your own piece of turf. It's the ultimate expression of property rights. That's your bit, you own it, nobody can tell you what to do on it. So it's the ultimate yardstick of freedom is if you've got any property rights, they must be manifest in land rights. Yeah. And we've never really had them here on the British Isles, but they did have them in the States. And even now, as you say, it's being taken away hand over fist, and the federal government seems to sort of scoop up land. I'm not really expert on what's going on over there, but we're losing our freedom. It's just another manifestation of, I suppose, realizing, in fact, the freedom that we never had. Particularly here in the United Kingdom, it's really important to know that the land's never really been, owned by us. It just isn't. The peasants on the land, the feudal stuff, and nowadays the government requires you to have to live in a designated sort of house. It's a residency. It's a special box on the map marked "someone lives here," and the government would lose control if people started living everywhere. It's just a control thing, really.
Yeah. What did your life look like before this?
Well, it's been a bit of a crazy one foot in two worlds, because I worked as an airline pilot for 25 years. So I had to have my normal hat on, as it were, at work. But I've always wanted to do my own thing on my own piece of land, and I happen to have a piece. And so I was always very sort of tilted towards getting out in the woods, as it were. So I've had one foot in two different worlds for a while, which has been quite interesting.
I mean, I don't know anything about airline pilots, but it strikes me that that's more of a way of life than a job. I imagine you'd spend a lot of time away from your family, and it's be a particularly high pressure job as well.
Yeah, I mean, it can be. It just depends on the context. It can be a very high workload job. It is these days for Ryanair and EasyJet pilots. Oh yeah, bloody hard work. It's very lifestyle dependent. You can be doing sort of wall to wall high short sectors in bad weather in Europe, or you could be going out to the Caribbean and having a week layover, and coming back a week later with a suntan. So there's two very different sort of lifestyles you could have associated with that job. But yeah, I mean, I always thought there was something more important really to be dealing with than just a job, and I did very much enjoy that career for a while. But there's just more important things, I think, Phil, and I always knew that somehow there was a mission to be, not wishing to sort of over-grandiose it, but there was something more important to attend to, do you know what I mean, than just having a job. And luckily, if you can be in the position to sort of follow your true desires, it's like, well, why not, So I'm now an organic farmer and a podcaster.
But it's sort of part of the system that we're brought up into, isn't it? We were born, and then we go to a nursery, and then a state school, and then maybe university, and then you're expected to settle down, get married, get a job, and hopefully, retire at 60, 65 or something. And, for a lot of people, their life is sort of planned out for decades in advance. And I can definitely empathize with what you're saying about it's, none of that stuff really means anything. I mean, like the sort of tangible stuff that people usually go to work for. I mean, I would say 80-90% of people don't enjoy the job, but they spend, a good 40 hours a week doing it, and it's just a means to an end. And yeah, you've definitely, this question of work-life balance is certainly something that you've addressed, isn't it?
It's really difficult, I think, for most people these days, because we're really in a sort of wedge situation, aren't we? Everyone's sort of cost of living going up, everyone's sort of squeezed, and it's difficult. But if you can sort of get a good work-life balance, it's essential, isn't it? And I mean, it's quite frail as well, I think, in some respects. Our situation here, we do what we do. We've got a small organic farm, so we sort of ply our way, make our livelihood, and it's just sort of scrapes by. But you don't get the impression that you're really helped. Do you know what I mean? It's not, or I shouldn't say helped, but just the monkey on your back that is government often sort of becomes a bit of a problem. But yeah. A work-life balance is important, and everyone should strive to do that.
Well, it's this question of value, isn't it? Some people get to a stage in their life and they come to a realization that the things that they were spending their time on aren't valuable, and there are so many more ways you could spend your time that would be more valuable or meaningful. And that's
Absolutely.
something I came to.
I think this is sorry to cut you off there, Phil. I think this is an interesting aspect of what I call the matrix, is that most people buy into the values that are sort of out there in our culture, don't they? Most people, if they want to know what to do, they sort of reach for that stereotypical model of how to live and the things you're supposed to achieve and tick off. And this is where I think, where you can achieve independence of values, it's so really liberating to not feel that you have to follow what everybody else does, in that conventional lifestyle. It's really refreshing if you can get off that completely and totally go your own way. And it is an issue of values, as you say.
Do you think that maybe the education system, the state-run, I should say, education system, is one of the main drivers of keeping people stuck in this sort of mindset?
Yeah, I think it has had a massive part to play in dumbing down the education system. There's a whole lot of issues that could be looked at there. But also, it's as rife in media such as film and stories and government propaganda. The whole narrative is so interwoven and laden with implicit ideas. There's so much effective control exerted even without the classroom influence, I think, because we seem to be in an age where people don't think that they have to think for themselves anymore. Our culture seems utterly disinterested in the idea of self-reliance and independence. It's all sort of put your feet up and drift along in the information age. And I think it's quite dangerous, really.
Well, yeah, that's well evidenced from the last 18 months, isn't it? When we've talked before, haven't we, how we think that a lot of people actually enjoy being told what to do. The fact that sort of, that, what do you call it, like stripping of responsibility.
Well, it's taking away choice, isn't it? I think that's the way, what's his name? Michael Crawford, was it? The philosopher?
Michael B. Crawford.
Yeah. Was sort of saying that he thinks it comes down to that there's too much choice. So he kind of summed things up by saying that the government removing that choice, that's why people kind of buy into it. So, you have to stay at home. You can only do this amount of things. It removes that from you, and that's his kind of explanation for that was that it removes the choice for people, and that's exhausting. Basically,
yeah, I think people are weighed down with too much choice. I mean, it's probably part of the strategy. But the one thing that we must exert our own power of choice in is the field of values. Deciding what's important, because that is so key. As soon as you just buy into what somebody else tells you is important. I mean, my kids are into fidget things at the moment. It was fidget spinners. Now it's all sorts of pointless plastic stuff that you can fidget with that pops and makes noises and spins. It's garbage that you can get preoccupied with. And somehow this is a big deal among young people now, and they've been convinced that it's a value. And at the moment they're quite young, and it's not really the right time for me to tell them that it's just a pile of shite and they've been duped. But I do hope that one day they get it, because adults should see that, when you buy into something that's just a load of hot air, I think it can only result in that tendency to just follow along with the group set of values. And whether or not we choose to have conventional jobs or believe in climate change or be a proud meat eater and not join the vegetarian club, anything that goes against that sort of tidal wave of cultural influence is pretty difficult to do these days, isn't it?
No, yeah, and I think there's a parallel there between that fidget spinner or whatever it is that your kids are into and kind of social media as well. Oh, we lost.
Yeah. Can you hear me now, guys?
Oh, right, yeah.
We're just having a bit of a choppy time with the internet, which is unusual. But all I've done is shut the window, and it seems to have calmed down now.
Right. Okay.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
Hope it's not my end.
No,
No.
I think
I've probably only got my son playing with his game.
I think I've fixed it. Yeah, I mean, I rebelled quite a bit at school, and I didn't like the fact that I had to wear a uniform, or I had to be at such a place at such a time, and I had to do homework, and I pretty much stopped going for a large chunk of it. And I think school is an important part of sort of instilling this conformity while they're young.
Yeah, and it's a kind of I think it's a bit outdated now. Well, in some ways, isn't it? It was kind of born just after or during the Victorian era. So like you can even make those again parallels between ringing the bell,
The factory, yeah.
and the bell at the factory, and you have your break and all the rest of it, and it's just like the same for when you sort of go to work. But I'm not. In some ways, the information age is kind of breaking that down a little bit in terms. Some people are against, what's the kind of term where people kind of just work bit part jobs and hours and stuff, doing lots of different things, and see that as a negative for obvious, for quite...
The gig economy.
Yeah, quite reasonable reasons, I guess. But then other people do come out and kind of defend it, don't they? Because it allows them to sort of work around what they're actually interested in doing and value, I suppose.
Yeah. I think the big important thing to remember with school, its big negative, if you like, is the fact that it's coercive, and that you don't really have any choice. There's no choice whether or not to be there. There might be throw a bone to choice and let you choose a few subjects, something like that. But really, it's effectively something that you must do. You must be there, and I think that really helps destroy the concept of wanting to learn and find out. It really has a negative impact, I think, on, life should be all about learning. Every day you should learn something new, ideally. But of course, when you've experienced 12 years at school, you've had enough. And you just want to put that terrible experience behind you. So I think the fact that it's coercive is its worst thing. If school lessons and classes were voluntary, and you could choose when to go, I think that really, really changes things. So, I mean, we home educate our children, my wife and I. We don't think that their best interests are served by being in school. I mean, particularly not now, with potentially them getting, experimental medical treatments imposed on them, even without parental consent and knowledge. So now's a really good time to be home educating and not have your kids in school if they're 12 and above. But yeah, just going off on one. But yeah, school I think is definitely a big part of the problem.
And it seems that like it's just sort of evolved into sort of a factory. Not a factory line, what do they call it? A production line, yeah, for the workplace. It's like the GCSEs. I mean, the reason they have the GCSE exams, it seems to me, is so employers can segregate, the smarter kids or the more academic kids, I should say, not smarter, the more academically inclined kids from the less academically inclined kids, or the kids who have a particular propensity for maths or whatever. I think it seems to me that the education system is just, it's like that. It's just geared to spit out kids and make it easier for employers to decide who they're going to hire.
Yeah, very much so. And another thing about modern education is that you'd have to really ask the question: what are we educating them for? What are we getting the children ready for? What kind of life? What kind of jobs? And with the difficulty of being able to look into the future, particularly now as well, and see something, it's just like a wild stab in the dark, isn't it? To think that they're learning stuff that people think is going to be appropriate when they, I speak from experience of having like a 10, 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. And imagine another 10 years when they're out, goodness knows what's going to be happening out there. And it certainly doesn't look good when you look at the political situation we're in. School just seems this wild shot in the dark, doesn't it?
I was going to say, go to the World Economic Forum website. You'll get a pretty good idea where we'll be in 10 years. Anal swab tests and
Yeah.
You'll own nothing, and you'll be happy about it. Oh God. Oh man.
It is pretty depressing. That, I mean, it's but it's one of these things people should know about, isn't it? This World Economic Forum and their agenda and what they're saying, because they're very influential. And it is sadly not on most people's radar, or not a part of their knowledge yet, but it should be, shouldn't it?
Well, the thing is, if they've done such a good job, if you bring this up, you're just labelled as a conspiracy theorist. You know, just for having the audacity to have a look at what the United Nations or the WEF is up to, or the Club of Rome, whatever. And, you know, they've done a very good job of, what would you say? What's the word? It's not ostracizing people for taking views that, you know, seem quite matter of fact to me about what may or may not be going on. But I mean, I was going to say, I think a lot of things that you mentioned, one of the things that you mentioned is critical thinking. That seems to be lacking. Maybe you should tell us a bit more about that. And, you know, with all the information that's flowing about, you know, good and bad, it's critical thinking, and the process of discernment, which keeps coming up with us, is something we need to be better at, it seems.
Yeah, absolutely. I think our lack of thinking skills, you know, individually and culturally, are a big part of not only the problem but also the solution. It kind of shows us where we can fix things. But I got really interested in fundamentals, in thinking in terms of principles and thinking in terms of fundamentals through the work of Ayn Rand. She really left me with that education of go right to the root, you know, of the tree. And so that got me into pursuing thinking and reason and logic and proving things. And yeah, I think thinking skills are lacking, because most people just think that what they do with their consciousness is thinking, and they don't take it anywhere beyond that. They assume that's thinking. And then when they hear somebody like me saying, you know, people aren't thinking, they think, well, that's crazy. You know, I'm thinking all day. I can't stop myself thinking sometimes, you know, that old mental chatter. So it's, you know, we have to sort of start by discerning what we mean by it. And of course, you've said critical thinking, which is a good way of sort of pointing it to reasoning, you know, inferring, thinking, asking questions, you know, this sort of thing. Rather than remembering stuff, rather than musing, pondering, reliving memories or worrying about something. These sorts of things aren't necessarily thinking. So yeah, it's important to know what we're talking about. We're talking about purposeful mental activity, and Rand identified thinking as a process of identification. All thinking, she said, was a process of identification and integration, which is sort of like thinking, oh yeah, okay, I've grasped what this thing is, and then integrating accumulated knowledge into the sum total of your worldview. Wow. And it's really interesting to look at the fundamental requirements of something like critical thinking. Is the fact that you have to choose to do it. It's volitional. And this is the sort of first hurdle that most people stumble at, because if you risk, when you start off down this road of thinking and inquiry, if you risk uncovering some really unpleasant truths that mean that you then have to rethink your whole map of reality and turn your whole life upside down, start again. You know, most people are really, really reluctant to do that, even if on a subconscious level, they'll just not know why they're not interested. But you know what I mean? So this thing of volition, you've got to want to know, you've got to really want to find stuff out. You'll want to understand independently, not just know someone who can tell you, although that might help in forming your knowledge, but you've got to really, you've got to want to seek some sort of personal understanding. And that is the key aspect, I think, of critical thinking, of all kinds of thinking, that there are a whole host of reasons why some people want to know and vast swathes of others just don't. They just don't. And that's a big stumbling block, you know, in terms of trying to move forward.
And it's psychologically painful, like you said, when you uncover those truths that you don't want to acknowledge, it's a lot easier just to pretend you didn't see it, or to just stop and not go any further, because isn't that what they call cognitive dissonance?
Yeah.
Well, cognitive dissonance is sort of, you've got a worldview and you're seeing information that contradicts it, or vice versa, any kind of contradiction, trying to reconcile contradictions and the sort of brain scramble that most people go into. And interestingly enough, it shouldn't really be such an alarm signal, but of course it does feed into this thing that most people don't want to revise their worldview. They don't want to do that. There's enough uncertainty already in my life. Thank you. Don't make me go there. And unfortunately, you and I and your listeners are probably aware that that's it's trying to do a sort of shortcut that's just short circuiting it. You're actually shooting yourself in the foot. But you've really got to switch yourself on and want to know. You've got to be very deliberate about it, and that involves reassessing values again, and being able to say, well, hang on, it's more important to upset the apple cart and start again than it is to keep clinging to this model that's crumbling anyway. Yeah. It is a sinking ship. And that phrase, how much do you need to suffer, springs to mind. A lot of people, for most human beings, it seems suffering is the most effective teacher at sort of turning up that volume until people say, right, let's fix the problem. That's the difficulty. But more people have got to make that transition, I think, and want to know.
One of the best realizations I had to help with this sort of thing was turning off the TV. I stopped going to football matches. I sort of started gradually pruning back all these other things that were eating up that time. You only have so much room in your head, and there are all sorts of other things competing for your attention, and you need to get rid of some of those to give yourself the space to then either start reading maybe on a subject. There are these things called books.
Never.
Yeah, they used to be huge, not so much anymore. Not many about now, but but there's just so much competing for our attention, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. And when it again comes down to that reshifting of values, do you perhaps zoom away from placing your attention on following the football or the basketball or whatever it is, and spend that time on something else? Again, that's a reassessment of values. What's most important? What's not so important? Let's get everything in order. But one of
the things I realised is that a lot of these other things trying to claim your attention are passive, whereas things like critical thinking and reading are more active. Yeah. And you get so much more out of it. Yeah, they're harder to do, harder to maintain, but ultimately infinitely more rewarding.
Yeah. I mean, I have a challenge at the moment with my two young sons, 9 and 13. And they just
funny names. 9 and 13. Tea's ready, 9. And they're really into their games. They're that they love that, and they could easily, like the sort of kid in the sweet shop could just stay and eat in the sweet shop all their life, sort of thing. They could just spend all of their time on these things. They are so appealing to an easy high, effectively. It doesn't take so much proactive effort as getting up and doing something, perhaps making a tree house or a go-kart. That takes a lot more effort than playing on a great game that's been designed, it's been honed over decades to be really good. So these devices are really, really good, I think, at sucking us into inactivity, aren't they, effectively?
And I think that's a bit to do with sort of like delaying gratification, isn't it? So if you're building a tree house, it's probably going to take you longer than sort of like 20 minutes to put it up, go and play in it and get that sense of achievement and look at it come back down. But if you're playing a game, I imagine you're collecting stuff all the time. You're getting that constant reward feeding back in, and like you said, and then you get to an end of a level, and then you get to the end of a group of levels, and then you go to a different part of the story, and You know, that's that instant gratification straight away, isn't it?
The game's stacked against you because these big tech companies, I've said millions of times, they employ psychologists.
Yeah.
You know, to make their platforms as addictive as possible. And the same goes with the media, advertisement, propaganda on the news, you know.
Yeah.
You've got the odds are not in your favour. They're stacked against you. That's why it's so difficult, isn't it? Like you term it as getting out of the matrix. I mean, it really is.
It is, and there's another example where you know, thinking long term is a major symptom of being rational and critical thinking and organizing yourself. It's a really important thing to do, but we can see right there, kids are discouraged from, you know, the building the treehouse activity. Absolutely, it's a long-term project, the sort of thing that would probably only happen in the absence of there being other games to play, but potentially really instructive and fun thing to do. But it just can't compete, can it, against, you know, like you said, the short-termness of the games, and we're seeing now, you know, people don't think long term. It's manifesting through. So thinking long term, spotting implications, seeing what things are going to be like, or having an idea of what things might be like. Of course, it depends on a lot of things. You know, 5-10 years from now, you know, this is another failure of our thinking. We could go on all night about failures of thinking. But that is why I'm you know, so passionate really about this stuff, because I think we've become quite dumbed down, more so than we really appreciate, I think.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. And I think the media as well. I mean, it's changed so much, the landscape over the last 10 years. You think of things like Netflix, the on-demand. I mean, that's another step down this road of instant gratification, where I remember when I was a kid, I got home from school, and there would be like an hour of kids' TV.
Yeah.
And then at 5:30, that was it. Your TV was done. And then it was Neighbours and the news at 6 and the adult programmes. Whereas now, a kid can watch TV 24 hours a day. Or if it's on Netflix, at the click of a button. It's a huge... We don't stop and think about how amazing these changes are and what effects they could be having on us in the long term.
Yeah, and they are really amazing effects, and they're very enjoyable. It's very easy to get lost in them, and I think this is part of. I don't know whether this has been a deliberate play or whether it's just the way things are, but it makes it harder, I think, for adults to really be adults and sort of zoom out and see their lives in context and sort of think, hang on, what am I doing here? You know, how am I spending my time? There are more things to get lost in. Like you said, Netflix, stick a film on. You can watch films all the time as adults. You can just get home, switch off, watch a film. Or you could live a life that was engaged. And I think I'm not against watching films. Don't get me wrong. I'm all for, you know, all sorts of entertainment. But I think it's important for us to prioritize again. And you know, it's actually fun getting into finding stuff out and being labeled a conspiracy theorist. All detectives are conspiracy theorists, and I consider myself a detective. So I'm a truth-seeking detective. I'm looking for truth. You know, I don't mind being called a conspiracy theorist. I think we need to reclaim that term. I really do.
I prefer conspiracy analyst.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, you have to listen to all things, don't you, Phil? You've got to consult all theories, all views on any particular issue. And if the mainstream view says that, fine, you know, we should take that on board. But if there's somebody else that's saying that's nonsense and here's why, then you know I'm all ears. I think, and I think any rational person has to be prepared to. You know, say, I don't care if I'm going to be called a tin foil hat wearing conspiracy theorist. I need to examine this argument because that's really what it's about. It's about following the argument.
It should ring alarm bells when all the mainstream outlets, news outlets, newspapers, online publications are all giving you one message, and then there's a small amount of sort of independent creators giving you a different message, and they're getting censored. That should ring alarm bells.
Yeah. I think it will ring alarm bells for a certain percentage of our culture, but I think sadly the remaining very large percentage, possibly in the 90s, it's just going to, they're just going to be tuned into the mainstream narrative, and as soon as the mainstream narrative says this, then that's what they're going to go with. And I think we've actually seen that be proven on several issues, several sort of major issues over the years. Yeah. I personally consider climate change to be the last greatest sort of coup. I mean, almost everyone buys into climate change and CO2 being a problem. Now, I can't see the actual case for that. When you look at the evidence, I can't see there's a case for it. It seems upside down to me. That seems that's totally not the case. But that's just an example of where I think these huge big whoppers have been sold. So, you could go on, but I think the public has proved itself to be completely susceptible and manipulatable to, if the guy behind the green curtain pulls the right levers and the show says that, then that's what people go with. And that's a sad lookout for where we're going, but I think that's inevitably the reality we're dealing with. I don't know what you think.
I came to this realization not too long ago, and that the famous maxim you hear from conspiracy theorists is "wake up, sheeple," and I come to the sort of conclusion that that's not happening. There's only a certain amount of people who have got their head on a swivel and who have the inclination to look at things differently, and most people will just capitulate. They'll just roll over for an easy life.
Yep, there's an important aspect of the educational system which has an effect where people are less and less over decades, less and less able to sort of think in terms of abstractions. They're more concrete bound. They're less able to think in principles, to spot patterns and things. And it's very much a sort of it very much limits your capacity to see the big picture. But in schools, you endlessly see various subjects taught in sort of isolated bubbles, and no connections are made to anything else in the real world. So minds are not being trained to join the dots, to form a mental map of reality that's consistent and not self-contradictory. All these sorts of things. So education has been pushing people to be more sort of concrete bound over decades. And I think as a result, most people just haven't got the cognitive skills to grasp the true nature of what's going on planet Earth at the moment. They just haven't got the capacity. And when you add in the fact that they're probably scared to even go to the edge and look over anyway, that doesn't add up to a big optimistic situation. Don't want to bring you guys down or anything, but
no, but that like you say in the schools, that transfers right to like the pinnacle of the academy, because we've talked about this before about how science has become so hyper specialized, and there's no one synthesizing these different subjects together. We've had it with like Egypt, talking to Egyptologists and stuff, haven't we? It's like the Egyptologists don't talk to the guys who are experts in ancient Minoa, and it's like there are bits of crossover, but it seems to be getting more and more narrow and more specialized, and there's nothing, like you said, no one joining up the dots.
Yeah, it should be joined up, because reality is all joined up, and our minds and our knowledge should all be joined up in reflecting that. And again, this concrete boundness is the opposite to uniting these concepts and seeing how they relate, the relationships of things to one another, which is our way of really understanding what the flip's going on. And I think people are generally less and less able to do that. And as you said, it seems to be manifesting in our culture, which it would. But yeah, it doesn't kind of look too good. I find it doesn't really look good when I look to the immediate future in the context of all this, pandemic and stuff, because people are just or the mainstream narrative seems to have people by the, it's got them right where it wants them.
Yeah. Where do you think things are going to go over the near term? Have you thought deeply
Yeah,
about
absolutely. I have, Phil. I mean, I think if for no other reason, I'm trying to plan my own life, and I want my children to survive and thrive and have grandchildren. You know, this is my personal interest in my life and everything. I want that to happen, and that makes me think long term. And I'm really concerned about the continuing slide into statism and collectivism that we're seeing in this country. You know, people have observed it's pretty much communism here in England anyway, although it might not look like that. They haven't sort of exercised all of the things that are sort of in the bag yet. It's still, you know, but anyway, the long-term outlook, I think, for this country is bleak. It's less and less and less freedom, and there's going to be more and more, I think, medical martial law, effectively, with needing to be, you know, needing to have on your certificate that you're free of this and this before you can even leave this zone and travel into the next zone. You know, goodness knows. I mean, there's scope. They can take this as far as they want, and what they've got is everybody buying into the narrative of the nasty V thing, and it can mutate into something else. We can have variants. We can have whole new viruses. There's a whole new sort of fairy story that everybody's bought right into. So it's like a slam dunk. It's like they've got us, because all they need to do is say, the fear level's gone up. This is a really scary virus, you know, and it will justify in the stupid public's eyes, okay, well, we'll have to give up more freedoms then, you know. I can't see it going anywhere else, Phil. I don't mean to be really pessimistic, but I think we have to be realistic and really think what could be the worst that can happen here, so we can act appropriately, you know. And
it might not even necessarily be another virus. I mean, I'm tracking this sort of pivot to climate change that seems to be on the horizon with the media messaging that we're getting, and potential climate lockdowns in our future, which I'm almost probably going to find hilarious, because I think people will do it. But that's the way it seems to be going for me, the way the messaging is changing, I would say, in the last 3 months or so.
Yeah. And the 15-minute city, is that?
Oh, this is a concept, the 15-minute city, where, as a family, you'll live in this block and you'll be within 15 minutes walking distance of all your amenities that you might possibly need. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but that's more sort of United Nations Agenda 21. Yeah, it's more sort of smart cities, and you know, your population centres will be condensed, and then you'll have rewilding areas surrounding them, no-go zones.
Yeah,
you know,
I can see that. I can see all this happening, Phil. I really can, which is alarming. You know,
well, it's out in the open. They're not hiding it. That's what they want to do.
Nightmare. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it makes me. I mean, I have got a plan actually to leave the country. Essentially, my fallback plan, if my life becomes untenable on this piece of turf, then I have a plan to, you know, go elsewhere. And you know, I almost think that that's something that all rational men should consider. They should at least remind themselves that they need to be paying sufficient attention, that they've satisfied themselves that it's safe to you know, to stay. I would say. I mean, it all depends on, you know, on everything, on resources and all sorts of things. But
yeah. I hear Mexico's nice.
Yeah, here it is. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, we're all in different circumstances, but you know, when we're talking about the potential of having these experimental medical treatments inflicted upon us, or to be so squeezed that life's impossible without joining in on the mass madness, I'm not going to let my children be subject to that and over my dead body. So literally running away is the ultimate remedy to that. And you know, it would be really tragic to have to get to that, but you know,
no, exactly. I love this country. I wouldn't want to leave, you know, but it comes to this question of principles, which is something that is missing for most people. Most people don't consider or take any time to think about founding principles that maybe they should have and they should stick to. And I think mine have evolved, and they probably change. I don't. They're not set in stone, but at least I try and think that I have some sort of moral principle that I think, well, this is a line that I'm not going to cross, and I'm not going to support X, Y, or Z policy because it's sort of fundamentally grates on me. It just isn't right, you know. This is something that people don't think about.
No.
How do you establish them?
It's difficult to to know what to do when you're sort of facing a rising tide of something. You know, obviously one doesn't want to, as the tsunami's coming in, you don't want to sort of run away and let the rising waters take your, wash all your interests away. You don't want to have to do that tactical retreat. But, sometimes it just depends what's the ultimate thing. And as I said, for me, the ultimate thing is avoiding that experimental, being part of the great experiment. And that is the survival of my family. That's the very survival of it. So it doesn't get much more important to that. And guided by that, that's the principle I take as the top of the, most important thing. That to me, unfortunately, makes me swallow the bitter pill of thinking a tactical relocation to another part of the planet might be in order for a period of time. It's all.
That's just come to me actually about the gene therapy, because you can clear this up for me being an ex-pilot. Is it true that on airlines the pilot and the co-pilot would never have the same meal?
No. There were times when that rule has been flouted.
All right.
Probably generally most of the time it's done as a matter of sort of common sense, but that I do know of times when that hasn't been stuck to.
That's movies lying to me again.
They're both at pretty high risk eating the airline food anyway.
Shit. Do you sorry, go on. I was going to say, do you think I'm detecting that they're sort of rolling back a bit when it comes to the jabbing kids? Do you think it's going to happen? Do you think they're going to go right down the age range?
I think that any sort of withdrawal we see on issues such as this are only tactics. It's like a fishhook line being played. And people are always massively reassured when nasty measures are retracted, but then turn your back and 2 years later it's popped up on the agenda again somewhere. So I'm quite cautious of things like that and reading them as a good sign. Look, the problem's going away. I'm not sure that that's the case. So I think that it would be consistent with everything else that I know and of my understanding of the agenda that they'd want to increase that. They'd like that sort of treatment to become the norm, with what they call boosters and all this sort of stuff. They want to ramp that up. That's a great means of invading the body. As soon as you've conceded to somebody doing that to you, they've crossed the ultimate barrier. Whose body is it? Is it mine or is it yours? And you've given up, you've given in. As soon as you said, I'll line up and take that. That's such an important barrier that the state shouldn't be allowed to cross. And that's why I think they want to ram it down. They want to keep doing it just to really knock a point in. Like when everyone washes their hands, they're implicitly standing on the premise there's something dangerous out there and I need to do this, which, in my view is unsubstantiated. There's no evidence that supports that. There's a lot that contradicts it. But every time you wear a mask, every time you do a ritual that implies something, like there's a scary thing, like they've got to protect yourself from, it really does cement it in your head, the action, the ritual of going over it.
Yeah, it's just reinforcing it every time, isn't it?
Really hammers it home, and the repeated jabs and the boosters will do just that. So we've crossed the line, we've crossed the line, we've crossed the line. And when you add that to the scary list of things that are alleged to be in it, and I'm not an expert, so I don't know, but personally, I would never risk that cocktail being jabbed into me. You don't have to know an awful lot about it. Watch a few videos and think, yeah.
I had this, when they announced the passports for nightclubs. And sort of my thinking, and I'm still probably about 60-40, is that that announcement was pure coercion. The only reason for that announcement was to get the numbers for youngsters. I mean, like 18 to 30-year-olds, to get them in the queue, and that it won't be sort of it won't be rolled out. But I just don't know, and I don't trust them either way. The problem is that the precedent has been set now, hasn't it? All these measures that have been taken over the last 18 months can be done again. Like as long as there is a chief medical officer willing to say that we need this to happen for the good of public safety, and so we don't have the hospitals collapsing. What was it Lord Sumption said? He said our system's based on what's it called?
Convention,
that's the word.
Mind read.
I'm proper testing you tonight, aren't I? Just leaving sentences with one word missing. I'm just seeing if he's paying attention to his own podcast. But our system's built on convention, and once these conventions are broken and a new precedent is set, there's no coming back from that. It's done. It can always be reintroduced, and this is what scared me about the first lockdown back in April. It's like, holy shit, this is
It's putting the
huge step
on the country. It's literally applying the economic handbrake, saying, "You guys all go home. Everyone stop. Everyone stand by your beds. We're all going to stop everything down." It's the government intervening to stop everything on a trumped up cause, and I don't say that lightly, because if any of your listeners wanted to do the research and try and find the evidence of the virus and look into viral isolation and the work of Pasteur and Beauchamp, and really delve down into that one to the fundamental nitty-gritties, we find that the whole thing's bloody on a trumped up cause. So the government has set the precedent that they can put the cultural handbrake on. You can't go to gigs, you can't gather, you can't bloody do anything on a story like that. So they having, as you said, having the precedent having been set, they can do that next week if they wanted to, next month. It doesn't matter. When they determine the time is right, when their psychological team, what's that set of offices near Downing Street?
Spy B, or is it the behavioural insights team?
That's the one. The behavioural insights team.
I love those guys.
That's great, isn't it? The behavioural insights team, the Tavistock Institute, all of the organisations that have.
Susan Mickey's one of our favourites.
Yeah, she isn't she? Yeah.
The communist.
She's a signed up member of the Communist Party, isn't she?
Yep. No problem there.
No, I know, yeah.
No. It's such a strange world that we've sort of ended up in, isn't it, Nigel?
It is. It's pretty damn, alarming, I would say. And I have a good friend who's sort of chosen an outside the matrix kind of lifestyle for a few years as well, and he sort of took to the road in a nutshell. He was more of an itinerant, and we used to enjoy sort of sharing stories of our outside the matrix kind of lifestyles. But unfortunately, it seems that ultimately the sort of our freedom and capacity for happiness is sort of limited by the sort of the greatest of the political freedom that we have around us, like this cage sort of getting less and less over us. And there's no escape from it. My mate couldn't escape from it being on the road. I can't escape from it on my own piece of land. It's like the ceiling's lowering in one of those nightmare films, where the room's sort of
the trash compactor in Star Wars.
It seems there's no escape, from the increasing political confines. That's what I guess I'm saying, and that really concerns me. Do any of you guys have kids? Are you family men?
Yeah, we both got 2 kids, haven't we? 2 boys.
Yep.
Right.
The best.
Yeah.
Boys are easier.
Yeah. So you get that investment in the future, don't you?
I'm very much a forward-looking person, and that's what's really sort of been distressing for me over the last year, is how, in my opinion, we've thrown our kids under the bus. for the older generation. And
well, just like talking about sort of like the lockdowns in a kind of a wider perspective. I can't remember the chain of like sandwich shops that it was, but basically he sort of came out and said like it was against lockdowns basically, and he said that he wouldn't. The kind of quote was he wouldn't launch a new sandwich without a cost benefit analysis. So it's all about, isn't it? The lockdowns are all about, making sure that the hospitals don't collapse, people live and all the rest of it. But the consequences seem to be of a lockdown, and potentially unknown consequences when they sort of just said, right, we're going to do it. But obviously more apparent now are probably, they are going to outweigh what the goal was in the first place. Well, depending on what sort of perspective you take.
Coming to the opinion that the NHS is finished, that it'll never recover from this. And I don't know if that was part of the plan, but I think that's going to be the outcome. I think more and more people are getting private health insurance. There was a story in our local newspaper in Lancashire, and it was a young lad, a 21-year-old, and he was partway through having braces fitted. And he'd had, I think, the top brace fitted, but he needed 2 extractions from his jaw, 2 teeth out, to have the bottom fitted, the bottom brace fitted. And he got his appointment February 2023. I mean, that's no good. That's not a health service.
Yeah.
That's a promise.
It's
Well, we had one, didn't we? So I don't know what it would have been normally, but my youngest son had sort of like recurrent ear infection, so he had to go. We kept taking to the doctors or whatever, and then he had antibiotics. It didn't clear up, so he said, right, we'll have to refer you. And we got a referral. We got referred in January, and the appointment was in July. So it was 6 months to wait for this initial sort of screening. So God knows what happened in between those 6 months. And I imagine that normally it would be around 6 weeks would be like the maximum you would wait for like a generic appointment like that. I'd a guess. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So it's all that kind of stuff as well, isn't it? And then what are the potential long-term consequences for him? But, it's probably not life-threatening, but there's people coming out who... There's a famous one, isn't there? Is she called Sarah Harding? Girls Aloud. So she got breast cancer, I think, didn't she? And because it wasn't treated, it wasn't caught early. That was terminal, isn't it? I think, as far as I believe.
Carol Sikora is a very prominent oncologist in the media, and he's seen papers and whatnot saying there could be 50,000 excess cancer deaths in the next year or two. Because of the nature of cancer being, the earlier you get it, the cheaper and easier it is to treat. If you delay hundreds of thousands of people at stage 1 and then they become stage 2 or stage 3 before they're treated, then your survivability rate declines. But again, it's like you said, none of this was taken into account. Yeah. It was just, Neil Ferguson says 520,000 people are going to die. Oh my word! I wonder if they use the same computers for them models as the climate change models. That's what I want to know.
Probably. But in what sense do you think the NHS is finished there, Phil? You mentioned that you think they're finished. I mean, do you think it's going to go away, or are they just in a funding crisis? I mean, what are you hinting at?
I don't see how it can. I'm worried that it will be able to recover. Now. As far as people on the waiting list, it's only gone from 4.4 million, I think, to 5.3 million. But they reckon there are around 9 million people lost in the system who would have come forward for an operation, but because everything was cancelled. So they think that the waiting list could go up to 13 million. The GPs aren't seeing patients. They're still refusing to see patients. Mm-hmm. Probably shouldn't go there, but there could be downsides from a certain rollout happening at the moment in the future. I pray that isn't going to happen. I really don't want that to happen, but it's a possibility.
The one thing I think about the NHS and all this sort of stuff is that the thing to me, it seems that it's a time to not need the NHS, and that might seem kind of strange and yet obvious thing to say in times of an alleged pandemic. But, our health is something that we can quite easily take personal responsibility for if we want to, and it's part of this wanting to know thing. How do I live? How do I run this piece of human machinery that I'm in? What does it need? What must it avoid? What mustn't I put down the chute? And it's a real powerful example of how, whether or not people can take control of their lives and themselves. But it's so important because the NHS is like the government's hook for us. All we've got to do is live the conventional lifestyle, follow everybody else's values over the cliff into chronic disease, and then the NHS scoops you up, and the government's got you then by the NHS and by your need, your desperate need. So this all adds up to me. It says take control of one's health, really seriously, to make sure you don't get cancer, because you can make sure you don't get diabetes, and you can make sure you don't get sick. I mean, you really can. People need to get that. It's not like spinning a roulette wheel. You can choose whether to eat pizza or, whether to go and eat something healthy,
Pizza.
Yeah. I do sort of fail the pizza challenge choice, unfortunately.
Shame on you.
But I don't know. I think recently, and ironically through lockdown, I became more active and sort of started to exercise more. I bought a bike as well recently as well. I've used that quite a lot. So, so I'm trying to make some changes, I suppose.
Some people, the lockdown will have helped. In various different ways, and other people it'll be a detriment to. But
I think this other thing as well, isn't there, about lockdowns in terms of the type of person. Well, I say type of person, but I suppose maybe what kind of background you're from, and the impact it potentially has on you. Like my kind of job, I could do from home quite easily, but other people were sort of put on. Furlough, weren't they? And then at the end of that, just kind of made redundant. So it tends to be people who are maybe from lower social or economic backgrounds that are probably going to do worse from out of that. I mean, there might be people that do better. I mean, I think, I've read a lot about sort of people reassessing their kind of life and their choices and the decisions, and how they, like you were talking about earlier in terms of, and Phil was saying as well, about spending 40 years working in a job that you don't particularly like, that it's just not rewarding, and going off and doing something that they actually, get enjoyment out of.
I mean, you would hope that the people, those initial month or two of lockdown, people would have, for a lot of people, it would have been a huge weight off their shoulders, not having to go into the office, and maybe that would have given people a bit of space to consider these sorts of things.
I think there's a bit of a danger that some people had a great time. They were told to go home, enjoy the sunshine, and get 80% of their pay. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't have had too much of a problem with that. Yeah. But I think that's a problem in itself, in that, it's the greater game that's going on. The government effectively paying people to stay at home. It's like, hang on, you're taking control of this stuff. The whole show has been taken control of by the government. Yeah. Why? What are they doing that on? Oh, yes, they're claiming this. Is there any truth beneath that? Oh, look, we find that there isn't. But the other thing about the NHS that I wanted to mention in terms of making sure that we don't need it, is that I think you could easily find these days, or going forward from now, that if you have to go in for any kind of treatment or medical procedure, as you get older and your body starts to break down, you'll probably need to get vaccinated to even enter the building. And again, that's the bridge over which me and my family aren't going. So we've got to, that one idea means that another one's got to be in place, and another one, what I mean, in stacking things up. But it always makes good sense to not need a National Health Service. I mean, I've got a funny relationship with the National Health Service. I'm not a big fan, and you certainly wouldn't have heard me clapping, last summer. I think that health is a personal responsibility that people should take, but there should be some kind of insurance scheme where you can get scooped off the roads, of course. But
oh God,
and have someone stitch your legs back on if you're in a nasty accident. So, that's important.
So would you kind of be advocating then for just kind of an emergency service, because that's the thing, isn't it, at the moment, that where private healthcare kind of falls down, in that if it's an emergency. So I've kind of heard it explained that if you're on the operating theatre table having like a knee op in a private hospital or whatever, and you have a cardiac arrest, you're kind of taken in an ambulance to an NHS hospital, if it's not, co-located or whatever, and they take over the care, basically. So is that kind of what...
I don't know. I mean, I would just advocate a free market. I personally go for freedom every time. And I'd say a free market, and allow someone out there to start up the insurance company to which I would be a customer. And I'd say to him, look, I've got some money. I haven't got a hospital, but I want to pay you to insure me against nasty accidents. So if I have one, anything, you come and sort me out and everything, and I'll pay you this much.
Yeah.
Are we agreed? Yep. Shake on it. Fantastic. That's all I need. And then I could save all that tax money going to some inefficient big monolith. A nice straight private setup would suit me, because I do want accident repair. I think that would be indispensable.
Well, Nigel, we've gone over an hour already.
Yeah.
We're going to have to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Doesn't time fly?
Yeah, easy.
We're talking about how the world is going to end.
Oh, I hope I haven't brought you guys down. That would be...
no, not at all. No, it's good. It's been good fun. Great to meet you. And it was an interesting chat. I mean, there was loads I could have talked to you about. I need to start reading Ayn Rand for a start. She's not on my list. I need to get into that. But
well, it's been great fun talking to you guys. Really appreciate the invite to come on and bat some ideas around. It's been great. Thank you very much.
No problem. So the Lawful Rebel is the website. Eavesdroppers. The links will be in the show notes anyway. If you want to see, check out Nigel's website and the YouTube channel where I found you. You're on some alternative video platforms as well, aren't you?
Yeah, on Odyssey, BitChute, and Brighteon.
Brighteon. Oh, that's a new one. I don't know that one. Brighteon.
Yeah, there's all sorts coming and going these days on there. But, that's where you can catch me.
Yeah, cool. And Living Outside the Matrix, if you're listening to the MP3 as well, just search for that. I take it you're on the usual major podcast platforms.
Yeah, on iTunes and Stitcher, absolutely. Or you can subscribe to the RSS feed via the website. Excellent. Well, this has been great fun. Yeah. And stay on the line for us while we play ourselves out. And check out the links, eavesdroppers. Right. Catch you on the flip side. Don't touch that dial.